Well, hello everybody, and thank you very much for joining this webinar that we've put together today called Into the Light, a practical guide for video quality control for audiovisual archives. Before we begin, I'd like to acknowledge the Ngunnawal, Ngambri, Kambri people as the traditional owners of this land on which we work and live. I acknowledge and respect their continuing culture and connections to land, water and community. I pay respect to elders past, present and emerging, and extend this acknowledgement to any First Nations people joining with us today on this webinar. I'd like to introduce my fellow panelists. Janelle Ward is with us today. She's a freelance audiovisual technician. With over 17 years experience, she has worked extensively in video and audio digitisation for the film, commercial and glam sectors. For the last 3 years, she has worked as a quality control technician for the National Library of New Zealand and Archives New Zealand as a part of the UTANA project, a large-scale, multi-year collaborative audiovisual digitisation project. Janelle's work has focused on refining QC workflows and ensuring the fidelity and quality of audiovisual digitisation. Joshua Ng is a digital preservation analyst at Archives New Zealand, specialising in digital audiovisual preservation. For the past 5 years, Josh has also been heavily involved with UTANA Digital Preservation Project. Joshua informed procurement and ICT infrastructure, and also co-designed and implemented digitisation workflows, quality control, and validation processes. Joshua is a core team member of the Working Committee for IASA TC07, Guidelines for the Preservation of Born Digital Video, and a SEAPAVAA Executive Council member. In 2024, Joshua was the recipient of the IASA Lars Gustad Award. Myself, I've established relationships within the digital preservation community and of experience as the operation manager at Damn Smart. I'm currently the Digital Preservation Coordinator at the National Museum of Australia and currently one of the Vice Presidents of the International Association of Sound and Audiovisual Archives. So before we kick off, I was thinking that we may have quite a few people on this webinar, so feel free to put any comments or questions in the chat. Joshua is kind enough to monitor that for us as well. And we'll also be updating the chat with some resources from the webinar. If you feel free to jump over to the Google Drive link to have a look at the presentations. And also there's a resource page there as well for you. So the context of this webinar, this was originally a presentation that the three of us put together for the joint conference, the International Association of Sound and Audiovisual Archives and the Southeast Asian Pacific Audiovisual Archives Association, so IASA and SEAPAVAA. We had that earlier this year in September in Hawaii, and it was a hybrid a look at QC, and there was so much interest that we thought we'd put this webinar together today. So the context is that the climate in Southeast Asia and the Pacific plays a significant role in the long-term preservation of audiovisual material. High humidity, temperatures, and variable storage conditions increase deterioration and fragility of these collections. Audiovisual artifacts can be introduced due to these conditions. And so QC plays a role in determining whether these artifacts can be avoided. Aging media not only has deterioration issues, but has hardware playback machine and machine repair skill set obsolescence. Born digital has an inherent fragility. Storage mediums can be inconsistent without long-term storage in mind, playback compatibility, formats may not adhere to technical specification requirements. Working with audiovisual collections can be an expensive activity, requiring hardware to support playback, editing, and of course, storage. Archives still need to work with audiovisual collections regardless of budget constraints, and we will look at some of the off-the-shelf products as well as some open source free-to-use options. So again, a little bit of context. There was in the year 2000, there was a joint conference also with the IASA and SEAPAVAA that was the first one in Singapore. And both organisations came together to see how they could work together into the future. And it formed what is on the screen, what is known as the Singapore Declaration. I won't read it all out, but the final point I think is relevant to this particular webinar. IASA and SEAPAVAA recognise that the emerging profession of audiovisual archiving now requires the recognition and availability of formal professional training at both the undergraduate and postgraduate levels. So the Singapore Declaration was brought back to the surface in the 2025 conference, and education is a part of that, and this webinar is a part of that ongoing commitment. And both organisations recognise that professional training is important, but also, you know, maybe more informal training is a good thing too, and that's one of the reasons why we're doing this webinar. So some of the goals of the webinar will be to demystify the QC process. What does QC activities look like when checking digitised and born digital collections? We'll look at some of those examples. We'll also look at some technology options and building QC advocacy confidence. QC work is critical to ensure audiovisual collections are well-represented preservation-grade digital archives, ready for now and in the future. By promoting these QC activities, we also promote the resourcing required, including staff skill set, time allocation, and equipment requirements. So why does QC matter? Digitisation and digital activities can be lossless in their nature, or they can also be lossy, cause errors, corruption, and introduce issues. By using QC activities to check audiovisual material, we ensure minimum alteration to the original material, thus preserving its archival integrity. Having sound workflows in and around QC checks prevents issues down the track with collections that haven't been checked. If checks pick up an issue early on during a digitisation project, this can prevent a lot of rework that may now be required, and that's only if there is access to the original media. There could be some catastrophic issue with a collection that may not be known if QC checks are not undertaken. Having a well-checked, guaranteed digital audiovisual collection gives stakeholders confidence and trust in the quality of the collection, from researchers, curators, broadcasters, through to screening events. So let's look at a few tools available for QC. There are paid playback tools available. We have some logos up at the moment. There's one from Grey Meta called Iris. Drastic Technologies also have a suite of playback tools and checking tools. And then there's also non-linear editing systems such as Premiere and Resolve can also be utilized. And there are also open source and or free tools as well, such as VLC, FFmpeg, and Audacity. And these sorts of tools can be used for what we call manual QC. And by manual QC, what we refer to is basically having a QC operator in front of the material that's being checked, and having tools available to be able to analyze that video material. So in the image here, we have a baseband video monitor that can look at the decoded preservation file as it was originally intended, with appropriate scopes as well. There's Blackmagic scopes looking at luminance and chrominance. And in this instance, we're looking at grey matter iris for real-time playback. Again, additional scopes for checking calibration and also checking embedded metadata within the file. And then we move on to automated QC. And so by this, we're talking really about software that's designed for very large collections where checking real time is not really appropriate, and because of time constraints. So by utilizing automated software to check frame by frame, these can help inform manual QC by selecting thresholds and the types of checks to look at. So depending on what type of archive it is, if it's a broadcast archive, maybe there'll be broadcast parameters that will be set. Or if it's say a film archive, maybe there might be film artifacts specifically that will be checked for. And then once those alerts are ready for an operator, that's when manual QC can come back in and we can have a QC operator check from there. And infrastructure is also integral for doing QC work. From a broadcast perspective, there's very high bandwidth, high availability technology stacks that make it quite easy to fit in those particular QC checks. But for archives and smaller institutions that may not be designed for that high bandwidth media types of workflows. So we're looking at different types of tools. In the image we've got here, this is probably something that's designed for a smaller archive. We've got an LTO drive that is good for storing large amounts of data in an ecologically friendly way. And also next to it is a direct attached storage RAID device, so that high preservation masters can be viewed locally and not be restricted by any bandwidth limitations. So before we even start looking at AV files, there are some examples on how digital audiovisual collections can be robust, searchable, accessible, all in line for long-term preservation. These are some fundamental requirements of digital preservation activities, which QC work is embedded in its practice. To ensure full compatibility between file systems and to ensure files can be tracked and managed independent of systems, consistent file naming will ensure small to large collections are well managed into the future. Documentation workflows, how QC notes are documented, and also how previous notes through the digitization process are available to QC operators, will ensure that there is no unneeded detective work. A traffic light decision system, which is included in automated workflows, for example, pass, fail, next, help to move through large collections. And file integrity checks ensure the file hasn't changed, been altered, or corrupted during the QC workflow. This is ensured by checks on verifications, and notes regarding render or cache files being created during the QC process, which in some instances can cause validation issues in the workflow. Mass digitization and born digital acquisition projects can create petabytes of data, and smaller projects can still be daunting if there's no resource, there are no or little resource available to check the original. I have a quote from DPC from their Technology Watch report on pragmatic audiovisual preservation. Working with vendors in many situations, organizations do not do their own format migration themselves, but rely on vendor services that have sufficient technical knowledge and hardware to create preservation-grade digital surrogates for analog materials. When this is the case, preservationists should research their ideal target formats, discuss them with the digitization vendor, and focus on performing quality control checks on files upon their return. If possible, automated quality control by checking files for their most crucial technical characteristics should be performed. In addition, visual spot checking of files should be carried out with at least 15% of the returned files getting some sort of visual inspection within the window of the time when complaints can be formally lodged. And Joshua, I might hand this one over to you for your slide if you wanted to talk us through it.
Yeah, hi. So this is what we use for Utaina, our mass digitization of magnetic media project in New Zealand, Aotearoa, New Zealand. So on the left, you see the criteria for how we brainstorm this criteria, and these are the things that we use to evaluate how we're going to be determining the manual QC percentage. What this means is that all of the items that we digitize by our vendor will go through some kind of automated validation and quality control. But we know that we can't manually check every single one of them. So we're going to have criteria to determine how many percent of things that is coming through, we will have to manually check. So the quantity is one of the criteria, complexity, depending on the material, potential problems that may encounter. One of the very important one that we looked at is whether or not the item is broadcast or non-broadcast, that amateur recording. And age of the format, for example, 2-inch is definitely something that we will try to manually QC all of them, because it's just such an old format, especially in New Zealand, where we don't have that many machine that is actually working. Whether or not we have the playback equipment available in-house, that is also a determinant, because in order for us to properly do a manual QC, we would have to actually have the ability to look at it through a playback equipment and then also the digital file, if we are able to do that. And also whether or not the QC percentage can reduce over time. As we understand and we work with this format, we might realize that, hey, actually, we might not have to look at everything manually anymore, or we actually need to look at it more because there's a lot of problems that we have discovered. Whether the format is a commercial one or not also has some weightage in our decision. On the right, you see the table of what we have arrived at the beginning of the project. That percentage has since changed throughout the course of the 5 years that we're running through. But as you can see, 1-inch and 2-inch is 100%. They are really old format. You also look down, you can see the audio cassette. We broke it down into non-broadcast and the broadcast. So the non-broadcast formats, we are actually manually QCing them a little bit more, 20%. And the broadcast one, we figured that if it is of a broadcast quality audio cassette, it should be fine. If it is visually conditioned, it's okay. Maybe we don't have to look at it so much. Shellac was 100% initially. As I said, as we discovered, hey, actually, you know what? Their quality is all right. So maybe we don't have to look at it so much manually. So we drop it to 50%, etc., etc. So you can look at this is how we arrive at this table. I think every organization would have to come up with their own criteria to determine what is the appropriate manual QC percentage, it has a lot to do with the human resource that you have in doing this QC as well. So we would have to take that into account, calculate like, okay, how much actually we can deal with as the media coming in every week. I think that's it from me. Andy, pass it back to you.
Thank you. Just one more slide from me, and I'm just touching on some overarching QC considerations. When conducting quality control checks on audiovisual collections, especially in the context of archives, libraries, and cultural institutions, there are a number of ethics and privacy considerations to keep in mind. These go beyond the technical accuracy of digitisation and preservation, touching on the rights, dignity, and cultural sensitivities of the people and communities represented in the material. Sensitive cultural content, appropriate viewing based on an awareness of cultural protocols may be needed if there's men's only or women's only business. Metadata and database information should reflect this, and automation in place to allow proper handling. When viewing this type of material, signage in QC areas must be up to reflect this as well. QC checks may reveal personal details such as names, addresses, phone numbers, or incidental captures of individuals. So institutions should consider data protection laws and ethical obligations. Only the necessary staff should have access to material during QC, reducing the risk of privacy breaches. And staff should approach QC with cultural awareness and sensitivity, acknowledging the human stories and context behind the recordings. Clear internal documentation of QC processes helps to ensure accountability and builds trust with communities and donors. QC checks must respect copyright status and not involve unauthorized reproduction or distribution beyond preservation purposes. And keeping records of who has accessed what during QC ensures responsible handling and oversight. And Janelle will touch on this a little bit as well, but thinking about the well-being of QC staff. Exposure to disturbing content. QC may involve encountering distressing materials such as violence, abuse, or traumatic testimonies. Institutions have an ethical duty to provide support, counselling pathways, and workload management for all staff. And to prevent burnout, rotating tasks and building awareness of trauma can help safeguard staff mental health. That's it from me. I'll stop my share, and Janelle, if you'd like to bring up your slides.
I have the wrong thing open. Right. Apologies for that. Had the wrong slide open. Right. So I'm Janelle. I was working as part of a team of 3 as part of the Utaina project, which is the New Zealand mass digitisation project for Archives New Zealand and the National Library. So this was a very, very big project with a lot of complexities for QC. We were digitising 14 formats. You saw the list of them that Joshua had up. 6 video and 8 audio, and we had material coming from 3 different collections across the 2 organizations. So they all had slightly different requirements in terms of metadata and file naming and structural file structure, and slightly different priorities in terms of fidelity versus accessibility. We did make use of some automated validation, especially in the metadata and file fixity, so the file quality. And then manual QC was done at varying percentages, as you saw, 100% for the at-risk formats like 2-inch, lacquer, SEAPAVAA, while the less at-risk formats like VHS and audio cassette were checked at lower percentages. A complicating factor for us was that the QC team did not have direct access to the physical media for immediate comparison. They were transported to Memnon, who were our digitization partner, and then were returned directly to the archive. This meant as we were flagging issues to be investigated, they were then checked against the source by the conservation team. We were also working to a pretty tight schedule. Ideally, we were to maintain pace with the digitization, and items will be checked within 20 days of delivery. While we weren't always able to meet that due to the quantity of material coming in each week, we were able to stay within 6 weeks, and we regained ground as various formats finished. So we were able to finish all QC within a month of the final delivery. To give context to the scale of the work, the project was a total of 70,000 items. The QC team, between the 3 of us, checked 21,500 items. Of that, approximately 2,000 were flagged for review, and then about 600 were then sent for redigitization, which is a very, very good redigitization rate. The content itself had wide variation. We had professional productions, oral histories, historic records. It did also include a section of material from the police evidence archives. Some of these cases were pretty harrowing to deal with. So we did go through a training course from the Australian Archive Association, I believe is the correct title, which gave us some resources for dealing with that material, and then also support from the wider team was definitely essential in getting through that stuff. So what were we working with in terms of resources? First and foremost was the team's experience with the various formats. This was a tremendous help. Between us, we had experience with all of the formats, bar 2-inch and SEAPAVAA. And that meant we could really pull our knowledge about what was an issue with the tape and what might be expected in a format. For example, how a particular tape might come out of a crash record, or what types of artifacts might be expected on a tape which does not match the format, which I will get into in a minute. We had a digital asset management system which did the automated metadata validation and file fixity. So, and it also did the assigned the percentages for manual QC. So that was all taken care of and was not a workload for the actual QC staff. For playback, we used Shotcut as we were working in FFE1, which does have limited playback on various commercial programs. Shotcut is an open source program. And then for audio, we were working in Wavelab, which is a pretty standard audio editing program. Both of those gave us a lot of the scopes and the flexibility in playback to be able to scrub through and check errors. We also had the analytical tools from Media Area. That's QC Tools, Media Info, EWF Edit, and Media Conch. And that gave us a lot of information about where problem sections of files might be. A spike in on a video could be a dropout, and that just kind of gives us, as we were checking beginning, middle, and end, like a focus of where the problem areas which we need to double check were. For tracking and resolving issues, we used the Jira tracking system. This gave us a clear history of the faults, and as some of the issues took a number of weeks and a lot of different people to resolve, allowed everyone to keep track of progress and make sure that nothing was overlooked. And then finally, last but not least, was a close working relationship with Memnon, our digitization partner. This meant when we found issues, they could be queried directly and followed up very quickly. I just want to highlight some of the benefits, I think, which we had for having the team working at pace with digitization. We were able to find issues and faults, and they were able to be dealt with immediately rather than retroactively. So that, again, reduces that rework, as Andy mentioned. It also gave us a more thorough understanding of the general condition of the material across the collection. We could see that perhaps material from a particular donor was in very bad condition. Maybe it had been kept improperly before donation, or perhaps they had been working with bad stock. The tapes themselves, there are a number of specific tape brand and formats which are known to be problematic, and that kind of gives the that sort of understanding of that material to the organization. QC was also the first time a lot of this material was actually viewed post donation. We found that there were a number of perhaps the tape was mislabeled, so that had come through to the collection databases, and we were able to clarify that what the actual content was. And also things like previous recordings were found where the content that was labeled was on the tape, but there was also some additional material which was actually of interest for the collection, and that sort of thing was able to be added, and we were able to make the material more useful to a wider selection of people. Looking at the material itself, so I'm just going to look at some of the faults that we dealt with. So these kind of broke down into three main categories. Artifacts that were recorded on the carriers. Now this is a material which the tape that we received, or the tape that is being digitized, was a copy of a previous tape or carrier. For example, a VHS viewing copy of a film. And that could include things like burnt-in timecode, on-screen display, or playback faults there from the original source. This one, so this here is an example of that. In this example, this is a film which has been recorded onto a VHS, and you'll see that there is a number of artifacts film grain, scratches, and gate jumps, which are all errors specific to film and not VHS.
The prosperity which the Industrial Revolution brought to some sectors of British society was not shared by all the populace. Almost a century later, there were many whose problems had merely been compounded. Work opportunities were scarce, and general health became affected.
So you can see that all of those artifacts are film-specific artifacts. Also, the magenta cast as well is an artifact from the age and condition of the original film. Whereas for a VHS transfer, this is actually a really good transfer. None of these issues are coming from the actual VHS itself. The next type of fault is what I'm kind of referring to as systemic faults. These are faults that are affecting a wider amount of the collection. Now, this could be by equipment failure, or it could be from a process failure on like a larger scale. This is actually one of the key reasons I think that QC should be done as a parallel process to catch these as early as possible, to reduce that redigitization, which is especially important with the more fragile mediums, in which case multiple handling will actually damage the material. So I have two examples of this from the Audiovisual project. The first is actually an issue that we found in QC tool. Now, here you can see on the graph, on the bottom row, which is the audio, the graph cuts out halfway through. And on the MXF, I hope you can tell, the MXF cuts out mid-tag. Now, we found that this was because QC Tools was using a 32-bit library, which forced a file limit of 2 gigabytes for uncompressed XMLs. This has been now updated and fixed in QC Tools. But this did take a bit of research to actually pin down the cause, so it did necessitate the reprocessing of a large amount of our video carriers, which fortunately was a post digitization analysis, so that was able to be done without a full redigitization, fortunately. The second example I have is an equipment failure. During our UMATIC transfer, we found that there was a faulty TBC, time-based corrector, which was being used, which created a frame sync error, which you can see in this this item.
Excuse me butting in, but I thought I heard you mutter that there's nothing richer tasting than the taste of Anchor butter.
No, there's nothing richer tasting than the taste of Anchor butter.
The reasons right here are growing out the ground.
It's this green, green grass that grows all year round.
Why, right through the winter, you'd find it'd last you, which is why Anchor cows can always eat pasture. That rich, creamy taste, there's no way you can mistake it, even though other spreads try their best to imitate it. When you tried Anchor butter, there's no richer to be found, cause only Anchor cows eat grass all the year round.
The frame sync error is those black flashes just in those last few seconds of the ad. Now, this was identified by the team during our initial POP, which is our first initial look at the format. And working together with Memnon, we were able to isolate it to a specific piece of equipment, which could be then replaced or removed. This error was required all the material that had been transferred using this particular TBC to be redigitized. So it was essential that we caught it as soon as possible to prevent that XF handling. Also, it was very important that the specific equipment in the digitization process was recorded, so we were able to actually identify the specific piece of equipment which was causing the fault. And the final type is transfer faults. These are issues on individual tapes which were potentially fixable. These were flagged for the conservation team who pulled the physical tapes and compared it to the file. These fell into 3 categories as well. Things that are on the tape and appear exactly the same as the file. They're on the tape, but they have been exacerbated in the transfer. So potentially a second run may get a better result. And things that were not on the tape at all and had been caused during the transfer. So I have a selection of different examples of some of these different errors. So just to give you an idea of what we were looking for. I also just wanted to highlight the AV Artifact Atlas, which is an excellent resource which for handling specific formats which you're not actually familiar with. Right, so the first one here is tearing on a Betacam tape. We found this across a lot of formats. It's a very common issue. This also actually highlights the importance of standardizing how you refer to an issue. As I was taught, this is called tearing. However, others in my team would call it comets. And we have also had other people calling it parasites. So they're all very different terms. So if you are looking for that issue in your database, you do need to know the specific term that you are using across the project. I have I have 3 examples. These are all from Betacams and just examples of analog dropouts at different severities. And in most cases, these will be able to be fixed in a second transfer.
Me, Graham, I'll get it sorted out.
Good, thanks very much. Ken, there was one other thing. You know the tables at the end of the company report?
Give it to me, Graham, I'll get it sorted out.
Good, thanks.
Through the long night to morning and success.
So you can see that there are various degrees of severity, and yet again, these were mostly fixed in a second transfer. The next example, this is off a 2-inch tape. This is tape stretch, which was actually caused by physical damage to the actual tape, which was realized once we were able to play back and compare.
Earthquake is all over in seconds. You must know what you have to do before you have to do it. We hope you'll learn some of the basics from this presentation.
So that was the horizontal lines that were coming up on that one. This next one here, this is the DV tape, as well as the visual pixelization. You'll hear how the audio reacts. In this case, it drops out completely, but can also be quite loud artifacts or distortion. Sometimes it can be just the audio error, so that is quite important to look out for.
To impose or to require some standard of the Crown where redress is not forthcoming. I think it's there implicit already. I think a court will do that, but you may well have to consider doing this in the light of concerns that have been redressed. Now, the other thing that I needed to mention was the
in this case, this was caused by the tape shedding really badly and causing head clogs. This was not able to have another transfer attempt made to prevent damage from to the player equipment. This next one here, this is a VHS. These green lines are from faulty TBC, which introduced a digital error in relation to one particular player. So these needed to be redigitized with a different TBC. So you can see it going from quite a large area to just kind of a small one, which means you do need to make sure you are seeing right to the edges of the video there. This next one is a pneumatic tape, and there are actually two issues here. Visually, there are some rolling dropout lines, which could be potentially reduced by a second transfer. The second issue is in the audio, where you can actually hear the audio time track, time code track. This is common on pneumatics, which have audio in mono on the left channel, but time code on the right.
On November the 23rd, at approximately 7:30 in the evening, an earthquake shook.
So for a preservation master, this audio layout would be fine. That is entirely usable. However, for an access file for general use, we may want to create a file which only has the left channel to prevent people having to deal with audio timecode, which is not pleasant. This next one here is a 1-inch, which has a color flash on it, which could be from head clogging or from just a destabilization of the tape, which again would go for a second transfer. And then the last example here I have here is it's a VHS. Now this has two issues. One is this very bad tracking and error down the bottom of the screen. Tracking can vary quite a lot, including flicking and just static down the bottom. And then also partway through, you see a TBC error as well.
Pretty much know what's going on here. Some of you might still wonder.
All right. So in summary, I believe QC is essential, ideally running concurrently with the digitization, so major errors can be found and dealt with immediately. Team experience is very helpful if possible, and resources such as the AV Artifact Atlas and also a good relationship with the digitizer can help supplement this. While a number of errors can be assessed blind if you have that background knowledge, when it comes to transfer errors especially, you really do need access to the original for direct comparison, either by the actual QC team or the conservation team, just to check that what you're seeing is not actually on the tape itself, recorded into the tape itself. And lastly, QC gives you insight into the condition and content of the collection as it's often the first time material is actually watched and listened to after deposit, and it can help enrich the collection database with additional information and in some case previously completely unknown content. And that is me.
Thanks, Janelle. There is a question from Richard in the Q&A, something about the pneumatic example. Are you able to see that?
Yeah, so we did refer to it as the TBC in this case. It was my understanding is it was a TBC that was reacting to a dropout on the original playback, which then tried to resync itself, which caused that black flash. And that was then the TBC was then repaired, and we were able to get that material redigitized so that the subsequent digitization had no issues on it.
So for the benefit of the recording, the question was about the low band pneumatic fault. Seems to be a synchronizer, which is holding the frame because of a loss of lock and poor tracking rather than a TPC. And Janelle explained that it has actually a few other factors that contributed to the to the whole artifact that we saw in that example. Now is the time for you to ask questions. We are here at your service. You can maybe raise your hand, or you can try to tap it in the chat, or you can put it in the Q&A.
And just a note as well, as this is being recorded, it will be made available as well via the IASA YouTube channel. We have up there already most of the conference proceedings from this year. So they're freely available for everybody, which is a great resource. And this will go up as well. So feel free to share it out.
And we have another question coming in. What advices can you give to someone that is starting an audiovisual archive? Andy, you want to take this?
Starting an audiovisual archive. Well, I think maybe the best place to start would be to get an understanding of what will be in the collection, understanding the formats, the condition, the documentation that exists around it. And that will help to inform what work needs to be done, what needs to be prioritized. Say, using formats, for example, some formats are more obsolete than others. If it's a VHS collection, then surprisingly, good VHS players are somewhat hard to come by these days. So there might be looking at other options in terms, if you are digitizing, is what preparation needs to be undertaken before digitization work that happens. Will that be an in-house or an outsourced procedure based on resources available and costs? And what checks can be ensured, including QC, after the digitization process? It does depend on size and scale, but starting with a prioritization would be a good way of having a decent overview of the collection.
Thanks, Andy. Janelle, you have anything else to add?
No, that pretty much covers that, I think.
Yeah. Okay, we have another question that came in from Anna. Anna said that she can see that there are instances where the QC percentage was reduced over time due to confidence that the format was being digitized successfully. Were there instances of the reverse, like particular formats that turned out to be more difficult or error-prone than expected? I think yes, right? Janelle, you want to take this?
Yeah, actually it was pneumatic. The pneumatic, it's because it's an older format and we were dealing with a mixture of high band and low band. And we also only had a limited amount of machines available for digitization. So that one, I believe, started at 30%, I believe. And we actually went back and did 100% QC on that across the whole lot, I believe.
I think so.
Yeah, because we were really worried with also having hit that TBC issue as well. We wanted to make sure that there was nothing which hadn't come through to manual QC, which had been affected by that TBC issue. So that was definitely our most problematic format.
Yeah. Just a point of clarification, when we say 100%, it doesn't mean that we are watching the clip from the beginning to the end. As Janelle mentioned earlier, it's supposed to be...
Yeah, so it is, we decided on 2 minutes, beginning, middle, and end. If there's something particularly long, we would do 2 minutes every either hour or half hour, depending on the format and the length. And again, we were using the QC tools and those sorts of things to decide where that 2 minutes would be.
All right. Oh, there's another one that came in. All right, this question is about what are some examples of QC specific to audio formats? Any of that spring to mind? We did touch upon that in our workshop in the conference in September, but this one we were specifically focusing on video. Maybe Andy, you want to take this?
I think, yeah, it was some of the audio examples didn't stream as well, so that's why we didn't include them. But of course, the audio checks are just as important as video. One thing that, well, there's quite a few things to check, but one that pops to mind that is really quite critical with magnetic media is azimuth adjustment on original playback. As sort of discussed, and this is another opportunity to plug an IASA technical specification document, where it's the IASA TC04, the little green Bible that's in a lot of audio suites around the world. Does actually go into quite a good amount of detail for azimuth adjustment for each recording, to ensure that we get the best reproduction and the higher frequencies coming off tape. So, you know, if something sounds quite dull on doing audio QC, there's missing higher frequencies, there could be a chance that the azimuth may not have been adjusted. It may be the original recording as well, but that's something to flag. And really, the only way to properly check that back is to go to the original media and give it a spot check.
Yeah, that was actually one of our major issues, was because that can be very hard to tell when you're looking at that completely blind. So you're like, this is muffled, but is it muffled because the azimuth's out? Is it muffled because it's just muffled? That sort of thing. Yeah. Also, things like tape squeal, stuff like that, from like things that haven't been played in years, sometimes decades. And you know, the tense, they're not going across the heads properly, that sort of thing. We found that quite a lot. Yeah, I did have a list of audio examples, but yeah, they just weren't streaming in a way that people could actually hear what the actual problem was.
Yeah, it's a little bit hard to do it online. Some of them are quite subtle. There are some audio examples on the AV Artifact Atlas. So you can also, at the AV Artifact Atlas, you can browse by format. You can look at some of them. Not a lot, but you can look at them. Maybe this is something that we can do, Janelle. Maybe we can update the AV Artifact Atlas.
Yeah, also I'd like to point out, just for audio as well, we found that in the disc media specifically, a lot of the issues that we found were like stylus-based issues, which were kind of a mix of handling issue versus like perhaps the inappropriate stylus, that sort of thing. So yeah, that was just something which did pop up quite a lot in audio media. Any other questions?
I think we are at time. We have 1 minute. If you have any last minute questions, you can try to put it in. We can wait for just a little while more.
I think that might be it.
Yep.
Happy to wrap it up there.
That sounds good.
Okay, well, I'd just like to say thanks to everybody that participated today and came and watched, and thanks to Janelle and to Joshua. If you're interested in any more of these, please contact us and let us know. We're interested in doing the IASA SEAPAVAA webinars. If there's anything you'd like us to address, or maybe make it a bit more interactive, that's something we might look to in the future as well. But yeah, really appreciate you jumping on, and yeah, look forward to to doing something in the future. Thanks very much.
Thank you, everyone.
Bye.
Bye.